to you and welcome to the fifth edition of our Emancipation 2017 presentations. This evening we will be looking at the Land Commission, the presentation by Brother Eric Phillips at the Land Commission during this week. This brings to an end our series for this month. We will, however, be back next month on the last Sunday at 8 p.m. And so without much further ado, as we attempt to provide context for things African here in Guyana, as we attempt to provide a cultural education for Africans here in Guyana, taking into consideration that African culture was banned on the 2nd of April, 1810, as we bring understanding, as we search for meanings, and as we look for solutions to the African condition here in Guyana, we go straight into the presentation by our guest this evening, whom I forgot to introduce. The guest this evening is Dr. Eric Phillips, the chairman of the Guyana Reparations Committee. As we look at Dr. Phillips making his presentation on behalf of Africans within a reparations context, we go straight over to that presentation. As we wait for the technicians to find the exact clip, Brother Eric, is there anything you would like to use to fill in any experience you would have had at the presentation that you would like to share with the audience that may not be on the tape?
Well, it's quite an intimidating experience because you have commissioners there at their desks. You have lawyers. You have to swear under the Bible or the Quran or the whatever it is, whatever religion you are, and it's very intimidating. So you have to be very clear as to why you're there. We were there as the Guyana Reparations Commission to make our case.
Yes.
Land is critical. Without land, there is no generational wealth. And everyone else seems to understand that. Of course, the Amerindians have 13.8%, and Jagdeo almost gave Guyana away to Chinese, Indians, and everyone else, his friends. Whilst our ancestors and our people today, who are just seeking small amounts of land, are being denied it. Some of the contracts are outrageous. You know, one group had 60,000 hectares of land at 12.5 cents US per hectare for 199 years. That's virtually giving away the country. And as Guyana gets more into an oil economy, you'll find lots more people coming here. So if we don't have a land policy, and if we don't have land reparatory justice, Africans will be left out because land has created wealth for others. You look at who's the richest miner. How did he get that wealth? From land, even though it's mining. Diamonds, which is still land. So lots of land have passed to others whilst we've been denied that very basic right.
Okay, so how do you see the Land Commission work contributing to the development of a land policy here in Guyana?
Well, they need to hear all sides. We've only heard one or two sides. And during the Land Commission, they've been told a lot of things. We were told of a guy who went overseas, came back to build a house, found out that somebody had come and sold his mother's land and the house. And this is in the heart of Buxton. He also told us that he believes this is widespread. They're prescriptive rights. We've lost land in Pradoville. We've lost land. So the lands we bought, those were stolen from us in many different ways. Fraud. Main issue for the Guyana Reparations Committee is that we've been denied our human rights. Our human rights basically state that for a crime against humanity, which is what slavery was, you should be repaired.
Yes.
And reparations has been provided to people all over the world. The government has given Amerindians reparations.
Yes.
There's no other word, no other definition in theory or in law that is different from that. The Amerindian Act of 2006 is a land reparations and a money reparations act for Amerindians in Guyana. And we believe that since 473,000 of our ancestors died, since we built Guyana, since the crime against humanity has been defined so by the UN, and international law calls for justice in terms of reparations, we believe is critical, especially in this international decade.
Well, Brother Eric Phillips, we've got you live. Let's see you at the presentation.
I'm here to speak on the issue of lands, ancestral lands not received, and of other related issues with respect to reparations.
Mr. Philip, what do you term as ancestral lands?
Ancestral lands are lands that have been acquired by the descendants of enslaved Africans. I would like to here today indicate that the word slave should not be used. We were enslaved Africans. And to speak about lands that the state of Guyana owes the descendants of enslaved Africans.
Mr. or rather Dr. Phillips, can you please state your case before the commission?
Thank you very much. Good day, commissioners all. I have provided a copy of my presentation. What I will do today is to go through it, but to not cover it in its entirety, just to get to the essence of it. I'd like to say that this is a very critical presentation for the Guyana Reparations Commission, and indeed, this presentation will be provided to the United Nations, which is sending a delegation here, United Nations Human Rights Commission, on October 2nd to the 6th of this year with respect to human rights for African Guyanese, human rights for the descendants of enslaved Africans, and in particular, the lack of human rights when it comes to land. I'm here in body representing the Guyana Reparations Committee, which is a committee established by the President of Guyana, and which is part of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which reports to a Prime Ministerial Subcommittee in Reparations governed by 5 heads of states in the Caribbean, including our President. I'm here in mind to make the argument that historical facts dictate that land reparatory justice for descendants of enslaved Africans is due in the same manner that the government of Guyana gave land in form of reparatory justice to 9 Amerindian tribes through the Amerindian Act of 2006. In essence, we are arguing that a precedent has been set and that the Amerindian Act of 2006 is a land reparatory justice act. We're here in spirit, though, and especially in the spirit of the Durban Declaration and the program of actions resulting from the Durban Conference of 2001, which labeled slavery a crime against humanity. And I'd like to read it out because it's important, especially Article 13, which states, "We acknowledge that slavery and the slave trade, including the transatlantic slave trade, were appalling tragedies in the history of humanity, not only because of their abhorrent barbarism, but also in terms of their magnitude, organized nature, and especially their negation of the essence of the victims, and further acknowledge that slavery and the slave trade are a crime against humanity and should always have been so, especially the transatlantic slave trade, and are among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related tolerance." I will argue today that Africans in Guyana, the descendants of enslaved Africans, have been racially discriminated against in terms of land justice. We're also here in the spirit of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially Articles 1, 7, 8, and 17. And I'd like to point out to the Commission, especially Article 8, which has to do with this Commission and the state of Guyana. Article 8 says that everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or by the law. We're also here in spirit, that is the Guyana Reparations Committee, in the spirit of the International Decade for People of African Descent, with its theme, Recognition, Justice, and Development. Former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, when he launched the International Decade, made a statement that said, across the globe, Africans in the African diaspora continue to suffer inequality and disadvantages because of the legacy of slavery and colonialism. Freedom from violence, prejudice, and discrimination are a distant dream for many. I will argue that because the government of Guyana has not provided land as reparatory justice for Africans, that this sentence here remains true. We're also here in the spirit of the International Convention Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, of which Guyana is a signatory. We're also here in the spirit of the Constitution of Guyana, and especially Article 149D, which states, 1, the state does not deny to any before the law or equal protection and benefit of the law. 2, the state shall, for the purpose of promoting equality, sometimes called social cohesion today, should take legislative and other measures designed to protect disadvantaged persons. And we are disadvantaged because we have not been given land justice. 3, equality includes the full enjoyment of all rights and freedoms guaranteed under the Constitution or any other law. And we're arguing that without land justice, Africans in Guyana, descendants of enslaved Africans, do not enjoy full and equal rights. And finally, we are here in soul, as we seek to put the soul of our ancestors at rest through justice. We're seeking justice first through a presentation here and hopefully through your recommendations. And to let them know, our ancestors, that the Guyana Reparations Committee has made just and fair and truthful representations on their behalf today, August 24, 2017, almost 400 years since the beginning of the Holocaust of Africans in Guyana. It is our hope justice will be achieved, and that the descendants of Africans in Guyana obtain reparatory justice in the form of land, in like manner as the Amerindians of Guyana received 13.8% of Guyana's land reparations from the government of Guyana under the Amerindian Act of 2006. So we're here in body, mind, spirit, and soul, on behalf of our ancestors, on behalf of ourselves, and on behalf of the future descendants of Africans in Guyana. I am the chairman of the Guyana Reparations Committee, and I will be the main speaker. We have others in the audience, Sister Esther Gittins, who is the secretary, Sister Penda Guan, who is also a member. For my opening statement, I'd like to state that we support this timely COI and its TORs. We've sat in anguish since 2007, when during the 28th sitting of Parliament on Thursday, 27th of July, 2007, almost 10 years ago, the heroic speech of Ms. Debbie Backer was affronted by the deep seeds of racism of the PPP. As speaker after speaker rose up to deny constitutionally guaranteed rights of African Guyanese, they used their parliamentary majority through fiction and meanness and racism to deny the truth of land justice for Africans. The debates occurred during the 2007, which was the year that marked the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade between Africa and the British Empire on the 25th of March, 2007. And so today we are pleased that President David Granger, a historian, now President of Guyana, is seeking to create, through knowledge and through this open forum of a commission of inquiry, justice for Africans in Guyana and land justice for all in Guyana. We believe all Guyanese should have land justice. In 2007, we sat in disbelief as the PPP denied the historical genocide of approximately 473,000 Africans whose lives were sacrificed at the altar of racism, greed, and inhumanity called the slave trade, to make Guyana's inhospitable land hospitable, and to make it viable to grow crops which enriched the British and Dutch. Members of the Commission, the United Nations, through the Durban Declaration in 2001, labeled the transatlantic slave trade a crime against humanity. So today we are here to tell our stories, the stories of our ancestors, of the brutality they endured to build Guyana, of their deaths, of their untold and unimaginable 200 years of horror. We're here to ask you to hear the facts in your humanity and quest for justice, so that you can also become their voice in the final report you will issue. The claim of the Guyana Reparations Committee is simple and historically correct and just, and so our advocacy is direct. First, slavery was a crime against humanity as international law as well as morality dictates. There should be reparations for such a crime. Two, the government of Guyana has granted land and financial reparations through the Amerindian Act of 2006. As much as there is denial of this fact, the Amerindian Act of 2006 speaks legally and morally for itself, as 13.8% of Guyana and an Amerindian Development Fund to make sure those lands can be used were granted to Amerindians in Guyana. Commissioners, it is the politics of deception that denies that that is a Land Restorative Justice Act. Our Amerindian leaders, if they're honest, know that the Amerindian Act of 2006 was an act that gave them reparations. Africans were here in Guyana before 3 of the Amerindian tribes who were given lands in the Amerindian Act of 2006. That is unjust. After years of media obfuscation, the Stabroek News on March 27, 2017 wrote an editorial entitled First Comers, and I have that in Appendix 1, that the Makusis and Wapishanas arrived in Guyana from Brazil in 1780s and the Waiwais in 1830. This is 100 to 200 years after Africans were brought here in the 1620s. How can tribes who came to Guyana after Africans who died in the hundreds of thousands to build Guyana, how can they receive lands and those Africans none? As descendants of Africans, we have not received any lands. By any definition, this is a breach of our Constitution. This is a breach of the fundamental human rights and constitutional rights of Africans in Guyana. History has recorded that enslaved Africans were enslaved and in brutal bondage in Guyana for over 200 years. The United Nations Durban Declaration, as I mentioned before, labeled this a crime against humanity. In 2002, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, was established in The Hague, and the Rome Statute provides for the ICC to have jurisdiction over genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. I'd like to share with you, commissioners, what the definition of crimes against humanity is. Because last night on the television, I heard the British High Commissioner state that we should forget this crime against humanity and move forward. I wonder if that same British High Commissioner would ask his own people to forget what a crime against humanity is. Here is the official definition of a crime against humanity: murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any form of sexual violence of comparable gravity. Persecution against any identifiable group or collectively in political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender grounds, enforced disappearance of persons, the crime of apartheid, other humane acts of similar character, I will say to you that that's a crime against humanity. And for the government of Britain or the government of Guyana not to want to provide reparation for a crime against humanity that's internationally defined, and for which there's precedent in the Amerindian Act, is also a crime. I'd also like to state to you that apart from going through the crimes against humanity I just mentioned, Africans built Guyana and should be compensated for it. During enslavement for over 200 years, the tortured, murdered, raped, brutalized Africans built Guyana. No other group, and I repeat, no other group, Amerindians, Indians, Portuguese, or Chinese, did 1,000th of what Africans have done, probably 1,000,000th of what they've done. Because we died 473,000 and they didn't. Listen to the report of the Venn Commission, which was done by the British. They, the Africans, had driven back the sea and had cleared, drained, and reclaimed 15,000 square miles of forests and swamps. This is equivalent to 9 million acres of land. In short, all the fields on which the sugar estates are now based were cleared, drained, and irrigated by African labor forces. In the process of building these plantations, careful research has shown that Africans installed the following: 2.58 million miles of drainage canals, trenches, and interbed drains, 3,500 miles of dams, roads, and footpaths, and 2,176 miles of sea and river defense. No one else in Guyana has done that, yet they've gotten reparations. The Venn Commission of 1948 also noted in its report that to build these coastal plantations alone, a volume of 100 million tons of earth had to be moved by the hands of Africans in the digging of trenches and irrigation canals. Based on the above facts, 1, slavery was a crime against humanity and a genocide of Africans in Guyana. 2, there was a genocide of approximately 473,000 Africans to build Guyana over 200 years of slavery. 3, there was no Amerindian genocide in Guyana. As a matter of fact, Amerindians were paid to hunt down Africans. They were paid for services to the British and Dutch. They were protected by law by the British and Dutch. So, to argue that Amerindians received lands for a genocide is untrue. That did happen in Latin America and in the islands, but not in Guyana. 4, Africans built the infrastructure of Guyana and made possible its economic viability. Canals 1, 2, 3, and 4, example. 5, the international community and international law says reparations are just for crimes against humanity. 6, the government of Guyana has given land rights to Amerindians as reparatory justice, with 3 of the 9 groups not being here. Therefore, commissioners, the Guyana Reparations Committee claims 18% of Guyana, the 15,000 square miles we dug, we died for, we were raped for, we were murdered for. We claim that as reparatory justice. Commissioners, you have an opportunity to bring justice to Guyana by also recommending reparatory land justice for the souls of the 473 murdered and exploited Africans who sacrificed so that everyone in this room today is free. Commissioners, you can lay the foundation of a just and caring Guyana. Commissioners, the Guyana Reparations Committee has United Nations international laws and conventions, a domestic parliamentary precedent called the Amerindian Act of 2006, and Guyana's own constitution to support our just claim. The United Nations laws and conventions include, and Guyana is a signatory to all of them, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention Against Racial Discrimination, the International Decade for People of African Descent, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Commissioners, 473,000 African Guyanese were deprived of their human rights during enslavement. Today, the denial of African Guyanese human rights continues unless reparatory justice is received. As you can see, Commissioners, Africans in Guyana do not count, because although our ancestors sacrificed 473 lives to build Guyana and to carve 15,000 square miles of hostile territory so that Guyanese can enjoy today yet they have not received justice. Today we are here to ask you to use this land COI to highlight our just cause and to note the unjust denial of lands to the descendants of Africans in Guyana. This is an egregious denial of human rights of Africans in Guyana and a denial of equal rights in Guyana. The state of Guyana owes African Guyanese land reparatory justice. It has already granted lands to 3 Amerindian groups, the Waiwais, the Makusis, and the Wapishanas, who came to Guyana 100 to 200 years after Africans were enslaved here. The Constitution of Guyana provides language to the effect that the state of Guyana should provide land reparatory justice to descendants of enslaved Africans. And as I've noticed, Articles 149D, the state should not deny equality before the law or equal protection and benefits of the law. The state, for the purpose of promoting equality, should take legislative actions to make sure you protect disadvantaged persons, and we are disadvantaged. And 3, equality under the Constitution of Guyana includes equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms, including land rights. Commissioners, the state of Guyana has acted against the equal and human rights of Africans for almost 400 years since the 1630s. This has been documented in the Guyana reparations story, which I will provide to you as an exhibit. Page 10 of book 4 of this story addresses the CARICOM Reparations Commission's terms of reference, which address linking past discrimination to present-day inequality. And in this book, we've defined 15 discriminatory steps that the state of Guyana, whether it was the British state that owned Guyana, the Dutch state, or the current state after independence, it's all the same state, has over 400 years discriminated against Africans, by enslaving us for over 200 years, by denying us human rights for over 200 years, for creating the institution of racism to justify slavery and to perpetuate it today. Number 6, the owners of slaves in Guyana received 4.28 million pounds. So we were valued, but we did not receive the value. So I won't go through the other 15, just to state that it's in my report. So, Commissioners, the impact of on African Guyanese of this denial of basic human rights is dramatic and severe. The descendants of African Guyanese, more than any group in Guyana, and I repeat, more than any other group in Guyana, because they lost their lives to ensure freedom for all other groups. The 1763 revolt, they lost lives. The 1823 revolt, which was just commemorated 2 days ago, in which President Granger called it one of the largest massacres, where 200 heads were cut off and put on staves from Bachelor's Adventure to Parade Ground. That's the type of brutality, that's the type of sacrifice we made for all Guyanese. Damon giving up his life. The Maroon War of 1795. And I hope that someone in this commission, some person brings up the Maroon state that exists in Guyana at Baracara, because that is a Maroon state that should be granted its rights. So after all of these sacrifices, we believe that the state of Guyana should and must provide reparations. That the state would continue to deny reparations today by just giving reparatory justice to descendants of Amerindian tribes, but not similar rights to descendants of Africans, is beyond belief, is unjust. The People Progressive Party, which has openly called itself an Indian party, as expressed by the former Barrett Jagdeo, has openly discriminated against Africans during the last 23 years. Racism was rampant, and that's a legacy of enslavement. Guyanese-born Professor Keane Gibson accurately defined what happened to Africans in Guyana. She defined racism as itself a political system, a particular power structure of formal and informal rule, sociological privilege, and norms for the differential distribution of material wealth and opportunity, benefits, and burdens. So the last government openly discriminated against Africans in Guyana, especially when it came to land. Will this government continue to discriminate against African Guyanese in the same manner as the previous PPP government? We in the Guyana Reparations Committee and the larger African community hope not. The Amerindian Act of 2006 was passed in Parliament during the second decade of the world's indigenous people. The Amerindians had 2 decades. Today, this land COI is being held during the 3rd year of the International Decade for People of African Descent with the theme Recognition, Justice, Development, which are essentially what reparations is defined as. Recognition of the crime, reparatory justice for the crime, development based on land and other forms of economic justice. The Guyana Reparations Committee calls on the commissioners of this land COI to recommend an African Ancestral Rights Bill that mirrors the Amerindian Act of 2006, but which will have its own peculiarities to match the remedies of a crime against humanity that the Amerindians did not suffer. The Guyana Reparations Committee fully supports the rights of Amerindians. I repeat this. We fully support the rights of Amerindians to receive land as reparatory justice through the Amerindian Act of 2006. The Amerindian Act of 2006 provides 3 distinct benefits to Amerindians in Guyana. First, the recognition and protection of the collective rights of Amerindian villages and communities. Today we're discussing all sorts of theft against African villages. 2, the granting of land to Amerindian villages and communities. And 3, the promotion of good governance within villages and communities through elected village councils. By May 2015, Amerindian titled villages across Guyana had communally owned 13.8% of Guyana, or 11593.2 square miles. So out of the 83,000 square miles, they have 11.59 million square miles, 1,000 square miles, sorry. Commissioners, some history is warranted. Parliament did pass that act in 1996. Parliament did pass this act in 2006. Commissioners, Amerindians have rightly been called the first peoples of Guyana. Indeed, 6 of the 9 tribes can truly be called first, but 3 were not here, and we'd like to correct that in our history books. But I'd like to point out the denial of African rights. In 1838, I'd like to take you back to 1838. There were less than 10,000 Amerindians in Guyana and 84,000 Africans. That was at emancipation. A September 17, 2010 article in the Guyana Chronicle said the following: "They, the YYs, seem to have moved into Guyana from Brazil during the early 19th century and occupied the upper Essequibo coast. Of course, Africans had been here 200 years before that. The same article pointed out the Wapishanas are recent migrants to Guyana, who are known to have arrived in early 18th century from the Rio Negro area in Brazil. They located themselves in the Rupununi and are described as the most reliable and industrious of all lands, of all Guyanese tribes. In 1994, UNDP expert Jorge Verriek, who's an expert in indigenous people, indicated there were 9 indigenous tribes living in Guyana. And I'd like to pay attention to his numbers. In 1994, there were 32,873 Amerindians. 20 years later, there were 68,675 Amerindians, according to the 2002 census. So the population of Amerindians doubled between 1994 and 1992, and 2002. I raise this because there's been this argument that Amerindians have been stewards of the land. We make the claim that in 1630, when there were less than 7,000 Amerindians in Guyana, they could not be stewards of 83,000 square miles. So I'd like us to have our history straight, because part of getting our history straight is to show the logical reason why Africans should be given land. I'd like to say today, because the terms of reference did include it, that the Amerindian Act needs to be modified to bring justice to Africans and indeed fairness to all Guyanese. That act states that any group of Amerindians, 125 members strong, can occupy land in Guyana and after 25 years claim it. I cannot understand how that provides equity to all Guyanese. Because as the Amerindian population doubles, they can split into groups of 125. And after 25 years, claim land. No other Guyanese has that right. That is a fundamental breach of the Constitution. There has to be some limit. Because as I indicated, in 1838, when we had emancipation, there were less than 10,000 Amerindians here. And there were 84,000 Africans here. The Amerindian Act must be modified to create justice and equity and fairness. I want to close off by just sharing some other facts, because we're asking for reparations. And the question is, what is reparations? Included in my document is a definition of reparations, and this is from many sources.
Yes, Brother Eric, that's a very interesting argument, that the Amerindian Act itself must be modified. Could you explain, please?
Well, the Act allows to go on land and after 25 years own that land. So take 100 years from now, when the Amerindian population might be 1 million, they could split into groups of 125 and after 25 years claim a lot more land than the 13.8. It's something that has to be capped. It has to have sense. At the same time, Africans who have died for Guyana and who've gone through this crime against humanity have no rights to land. So it has to be balanced. We agree that they should have land, but we should also have land because of international law and because of precedent. The precedent is that the government of Guyana in 2006, after independence, gave lands to Amerindia. But they forgot during the negotiations about Africans. It's the same issue where in 1919, the 5th of December, the British government, gave Guyana as a colony to India. So we had died 473,000, we had slaved for 200 years, but here's this foreign power again, giving India Guyana as a colony instead of repairing and giving lands to Africa.
Because this is unknown and quite controversial, what is the source of this information that the British offered Guyana to the Indians?
We have a 60-page document that describes in great detail that plan. It started on the 5th of December 1919 and went as far as 1929. And famous people in Ghana, such as the Lakus, went to India to argue for that. And the Indians who were coming here, 7,500 families, were given more rights than Africans who had been here.
Well, that's a very interesting bit of information. It speaks to the denial of justice, the derecognition, and in some ways, the contribution to the non-development of the African community. On the 20th, last Sunday, there was a forum at the Critchlow Labour College, which was hosted by the Cuffy 250 and the IPADA G, Country Coordinating Mechanism. There was a presentation that was made on behalf of the people, work that was done.
Yeah, you made that presentation, and I think we had wanted tonight to open the phones to questions, but I believe that your presentation is very critical for Africans in Guyana and all Guyanese, because it's a call to action. It's a call to begin the process of making sure the United Nations International Decade, the obligations of the government of Guyana are kept. So I'm glad that tonight we have that. And if there's any time left, we'll open it up to phone.
Okay, so let's see what this call to action actually was.
Assalamu alaikum, shalom alaikum, Jah, Rastafari, peace, all protocols observed. On August 7th, 2016, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Mr. David Granger, advised the African populace to organize and mobilize. Don't agonize. It's time to organize, time to mobilize, he said. These words were given to the African community in an effort to give effect to the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent, which aims to have African people of African ancestry, enjoying full and equal participation in all aspects of society via the strengthening of national, regional, and international action, and through cooperation in relation to the full enjoyment of economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights. To promote a greater knowledge of and respect for the diverse heritage, culture, and contributions of people of African descent to the development of Guyana. To adopt and strengthen national, regional, and international legal frameworks in accordance with the Durban Declaration and Program of Action and the International Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and to ensure their full and effective implementation. On that occasion, His Excellency said, there needs to be now an organization and a plan in order to ensure the implementation of a program of action which focuses on expiation, education, employment, equality, and economics as we strive for recognition, justice, and sustainable development. This charge, brothers and sisters, led to the formation of a core group which eventually morphed into the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly Guyana Country Coordinating Mechanism, a unique bunch of people who have, like our forebears who we embrace today, surmounted debilitating odds to make today a reality. We all need to congratulate ourselves. On November 6, 2016, His Excellency was apprised of, by way of a letter, of a machinery to be established and a process to be initiated for the crafting of the plan, which would be developed along the following lines: field research, solicitation of recommendations in the compilation of a plan, information gathering on the state of the African Guyanese community, review of literature, the administration of engineer, review of that literature, and today, Cuffy 250's 5th annual State of African Guyanese Forum, which will be the occasion for the presentation of the IPADA's findings, which will be subjected to workshop deliberations, the report of which will be considered in the preparation of the final plan. The workshops of which you will be a part will provide for an opportunity for the wider community to review not only the process, but the recommendations arising from that process, thus furthering the finalization to the plan, a copy of which has already been availed to His Excellency. This plan is intended to respond to the incredulous acts of and the removal of the legacies of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance leveled against Africans in Guyana, all of which were sponsored by the state, nationally and internationally. These acts of state-sponsored education, economic, entertainment, legislative, anti-labor, political, domestic, spiritual, and mental warfare have left African Guyanese, who once produced 100% of the nation's gross domestic product, now sharing less than a paltry 5% with the 9 indigenous tribes of Guyana. We are responding to an international crisis and an international mandate to do something about our condition, which is a grim but unrecognized one. Today, we choose to trace on this grim canvas a picture of hope, of determination, and success. We thank Brigadier Retired David Granger, now His Excellency President of the Cooperative Republic, Gay McDougall, Dudu Dayen, and the ACDA IDB Social Inclusion Survey, among others, for leaving footprints in the sand of our grim reality. Brigadier Granger opined some years ago on the probability of Africans in Guyana being re-enslaved by drugs and the satanic cultus of the death squads, a vulnerability introduced by urban and rural poverty, estrangement from identity, domestic abuse, vulnerability to preventable diseases, abandonment of agricultural production in favor of exploitative financial relationships, semi-literacy, indiscipline, lack of commitment to learning, unruliness, a proliferation of teenage pregnancies, recidivism among young men, and susceptibility to seduction into a life of crime. The litany of woes in the African community is enhanced by unemployment, poor education, poor family relations, poor nutrition, poor health, and poor housing, and which are all an imposition of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and their related intolerance. Sister Gay McDougall spoke of a continuing social malaise, unexplained despair, anger and resistance, exclusion, discrimination, and criminalization, excluded from full national involvement, denial of employment and economic opportunities, stigmatization, males and entire African communities being stigmatized, derogatory stereotypes of criminality, distorted wider societal perceptions of African Guyanese individuals and communities, scarcity of employment opportunities for women, the heavy burden of care shouldered by single mothers, domestic violence, poverty, unemployment, and unequal levels of political participation. Speaking generally, DN identified a profound moral, emotional, and political fatigue arising out of the individual and collective impacts of ethnic polarization. But it is the findings of the AGDA IDB Social Inclusion Survey which are the most frightening and the clearest of clarion calls to every African Guyanese to come to attention, irrespective of whether you are Christian or non-Christian, rich or poor, urban or rural, professional or artisan, sick or well, conscious or not conscious. For if we don't make use of the opportunity now, we will not have a viable and sustained society in the immediate future. The findings in this survey show our young people's perceptions of their society as being consistent with Granger et al. The young people expressed opinions of being discriminated against, low in trust, stigmatized, inequitable recipients of resources, locked out of participation in the society more because of race than lack of qualifications or gender. Criminalization, which has had a negative impact on residents in the communities to which they belong, felt that their communities were under siege, profiled, stopped and searched, felt insecure, had a negative perception.
Yes, and so that is a lot of information. But it is absolutely important for us to get your responses, and so the lines are open now for you to call in. The telephone line numbers are on the screen. Brother Eric, can you sum it up?
It's difficult to sum up, but the essence of both messages is the following. Africans have had a crime against humanity committed against them in Guyana. International law states that they should be repaired. Amerindians have been repaired. Africans are waiting to be repaired, and we hope this parliament repairs us. Especially in the International Decade for People of African Descent, where the United Nations itself has agreed that we have been harmed irrevocably. And so the decade with the theme recognition of the crime, justice, which is reparations, and using reparations to develop so we can catch up. That kind of summarizes everything.
Speak to the significance of the findings of the AGDA IDB survey, which showed the perceptions of our young people about themselves.
Yeah, our young people, and this was done in 2009, and it continues. They believe that they have no role in this society. They believe they're not valued. They believe they're looked upon as thugs. When they go for job interviews, there's this stigma attached to them. They believe that they don't have equal rights. The police treats them badly. The legal system treats them badly. The commercial, private sector treats them badly. So for them, they feel trapped. They feel as if they're still enslaved.
We're waiting on your calls. We've got a caller, you're on the line.
Hi, good night.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, must say good night to Brother Eric and you, Professor Diane. And it has been some very valuable information that has been shared with the African community, and I hope that it just don't be words falling on deaf ears or words falling on the ears of Africans, then just dying down. But I hope that along with the upcoming parliament, communities, individuals, families, that we can come together as a unit and fight for our rights, fight for what we deserve until that time. But we hope it's in the near future and not in the distant one. But it's important that we put all our energies and everything we have to fight as if this is our last breath we're taking to survive. If we don't see it that way, well, then we're gonna, be in some trouble.
Oh, thank you very much, caller. Brother Eric.
He's right on target. We need to first know our history, know the facts, and then use those facts to unite and to seek justice.
Caller, you're on the line.
Good night, sir.
Can you speak up, please?
Yes, I'm saying good night.
Thank you very much, sir. Good night.
I was saying, we as African descendants, if you read the Bible, when the Africans, they didn't leave Egypt, God instructed Joshua to distribute to the families land equal as how the family were big. If they were 12 or 13 or the number in the family, so they were given land. And we as African descendants, regardless of where we are in the Caribbean, we supposed to be having land without paying for it.
So true.
Thank you very
Justice.
much. Thank you very much, caller. Eric, Brother Eric would like to respond.
Yes, the whole Caribbean, you know, it wasn't just in Guyana. And that's why the CARICOM Reparations Commission has been formed to seek reparations from the 8 European countries that committed this crime against humanity. So when you hear the British High Commissioner says, forget it, you know that we can't, because we're living the legacy.
President Granger is high on the issue of education.
Yes.
And on the 20th, he spoke about demythifying the education and being thorough about the research to develop these new facts. Somebody texted and said they hope that this information is taught to African Guyanese in Guyana, especially as it relates to the number of persons, Africans, who died to build Guyana. Caller, you're on the line. Oh, sorry about that. Caller, you're on the line.
Yes, good night. I'd like to get on.
Could you speak up, please?
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to get online.
You are on. Please speak.
Pardon?
You are on.
I'm on?
Yes.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, you're online. Good evening, you're online.
Yes, I'd like to get to speak with Mr. Phillips.
Yes, can you go ahead, please, and make your comment?
Hello, good evening to you, good sir.
Good
Yes,
evening.
good evening, sir.
The reason why I'm calling, I'd like to know if your brilliant presentation is documented so that it can be sourced at a bookstore. I would very much like to have a copy, and it would be very, very instrumental if you could get that made available to other guys.
That is the video presentation.
Yeah, the transcript. He's looking for a book. Yes, we will have it in booklet form, and it should be available in about a month. It
Okay.
has a lot more details than the actual presentation because the land COI went on for 2 hours.
Good evening, you're online.
Hi, good night, Mr. Adams and Mr. Eric Phillips.
Yes,
Hi.
good evening. We've got a few seconds more.
Yeah. I'd like to make a quick contribution. Now,
Yes.
while we have this notion of respiration and what we want to do and how we have to filter that back into all of the communities, the program will probably highlight in the region number 4, probably a little bit in Linden and so on, but how do we get this information to the outreach? Bartico, Essequibo, Borbis.
Thank you very much, sir. We
Well,
got your question
We're
because we got to
hoping-
wrap up.
We're hoping that because this is an NCN, which is nationwide, that people will start to hear. But like the previous caller, we'll have a booklet, and also the Guyana Reparations Committee has outreaches. Also in September, October, November, and December, we'll continue to have TV programs. But we'll put it on YouTube, we'll put it on Facebook, we'll put it everywhere, but we'll streamline it because it's a lot of information. We summarize 38 pages of information in that presentation.
And on that point, it is absolutely necessary, Brother Eric, for us to wrap up. Join us on the last Sunday of next month at 8 p.m. when we bring you, once again, Reparations Now, as we aim to give context to things African in Guyana, as we search for understandings, as we provide meaning, and as we search for solutions also too. So until next Sunday when we meet once again, it is time for Reparations Now.